I remember the first time I truly understood that I was invisible to my family. I was 7 years old, and Christmas morning had arrived with all the magic a child could hope for. The tree sparkled with tinsel and colored lights, presents stacked beneath it in neat, colorful rows. My mother handed out gifts one by one, and I watched as my older sister, Claire, unwrapped doll after doll, art supplies, a new bicycle. When my turn came, I received a pair of socks and a used coloring book. I smiled and said thank you because that was what I had been taught to do. Be grateful. Don't make a fuss. Don't be a burden. Those words became the quiet anthem of my childhood, a whispered mantra that followed me through every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering where I was reminded that my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. My name is Eleanor, but my family has always called me Ellie, a name I have grown to loathe because of the way it sounds when they say it. Dismissive. Like swatting away a fly. Claire, on the other hand, was their princess, their golden child, the sun around which our entire family orbited. My parents, Margaret and Robert, doted on her with an intensity that left no room for me. It wasn't that they were cruel in obvious ways. They never hit me or called me names. Their neglect was far more subtle and therefore far more damaging. They simply forgot about me. They forgot to save me a seat at the dinner table. They forgot to buy me a birthday cake. They forgot to pick me up from school, leaving me waiting on the curb for hours until a teacher finally called home. They were always sorry afterward, always full of excuses. Claire had a dance recital, Claire had a doctor's appointment, Claire had a bad day and needed extra attention. I learned early that Claire's needs would always eclipse my own, and I learned to stop asking for anything at all. The holiday pattern began when I was 9. Thanksgiving was approaching, and I was excited because my grandparents were coming to town. I loved my grandparents. They were the only ones who seemed to see me, who asked about my day, who listened when I spoke. I had been working on a drawing for them for weeks, a detailed sketch of their old farmhouse that I had recreated from memory. I was proud of it. I thought maybe this Thanksgiving would be different. Maybe I would finally feel like I belonged. The day before Thanksgiving, my mother sat me down in the kitchen. The smell of pie crust and cinnamon filled the air, and I remember thinking that this was the kind of moment you saw in movies, a mother and daughter baking together, sharing secrets. But my mother wasn't baking with me. She was folding laundry, her eyes fixed on the television mounted on the wall. Ellie, we need to talk about tomorrow, she said. I nodded eagerly, already imagining the long table filled with food, the laughter, the warmth. Your grandparents are sleeping in the guest room, obviously, she continued. And Claire needs her own space because she has a big test the following week. She needs to study without distractions. I waited, not understanding where this was going. So we're going to have you sleep on the couch in the basement, she said. It folds out into a bed. It will be fine. You'll have plenty of room down there. The basement. The cold, dark basement with the concrete floors and the spiders and the washer and dryer that made loud banging sounds all night. I had never been allowed to play down there because it was too dangerous, too dirty. But suddenly it was fine for me to sleep there. What about the study? I asked. We had a small study on the first floor with a pull-out sofa. It wasn't ideal, but it was warm and close to everyone else. Your father needs that for work, my mother said without looking at me. He has early calls. You understand. I understood. I understood that there was always an excuse, always a reason why I had to be pushed to the margins, why I had to make myself smaller and quieter and more invisible. I didn't argue. I had learned that arguing only made things worse. So I carried my pillow and my blanket down to the basement, and I slept on that musty fold-out couch while the pipes groaned and the furnace clicked on and off all night. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up to the sound of my family laughing upstairs. They had started the day without me. They had eaten breakfast without me. When I finally climbed the stairs, my mother glanced at me and said, "Oh, there you are. We didn't want to wake you." I sat at the kids' table, even though I was 12 and Claire was 14, and I watched as the adults passed dishes and poured wine and told stories that did not include me. My grandmother noticed, though. She came over and sat beside me, putting her arm around my shoulders. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked quietly. I nodded and forced a smile. "I'm fine, Grandma. Everything is fine." She looked at me with sad eyes, and I think she knew the truth, but she didn't push. She just squeezed my shoulder and said, "You're a good girl, Ellie. Don't ever forget that." That was the first holiday I remember being explicitly told that there was no room for me. But it was far from the last. As the years passed, the pattern solidified into something almost ritualistic. Every Easter, Every 4th of July, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, my family would gather at my parents' house, and every time, I would be informed that space was tight. Claire and her husband, Mark, and later their 2 children, would always have priority. They needed the guest room because of the baby. They needed the pull-out couch because Mark had a bad back. They needed the study because the kids needed a quiet place to nap. And I, the single one, the one without a spouse or children, could sleep on the basement couch. Or the floor of the laundry room. Or, on one particularly memorable Thanksgiving, the back seat of my own car parked in the driveway because every square inch of the house had been claimed. I remember sitting in that car at 2 in the morning, the November cold seeping through the windows, watching the lights go out in my parents' house one by one. Claire and Mark and their kids were warm inside, tucked into beds with clean sheets and pillows. My parents were in their room, probably already asleep. And I was alone in the dark, shivering in a car that smelled like fast food and old coffee. I could have driven home. I had my own apartment 40 minutes away. But some stubborn part of me wanted to be there in the morning. I wanted to prove that I belonged, that I had a right to be at my own family's holiday. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me leave. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen with dark circles under my eyes and a stiffness in my neck from sleeping sitting up. My mother was making pancakes. She looked at me and said, "You look tired, Ellie. Rough night." I didn't answer. I just poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. Claire was there with her kids, laughing and chatting with my father. No one asked where I had slept. No one seemed to care that I had spent the night in my car. It was as if my discomfort was not only acceptable but expected, as if my role in the family was to absorb the inconvenience so that everyone else could be comfortable. That was the first time I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was something colder, harder. A realization that I could not change them, that I could only change how I responded. But I wasn't ready to act on that realization yet. I was still hoping, still believing that if I just tried hard enough, if I was just good enough, they would finally see me. That hope kept me going for another 10 years. I went to college, partly because I wanted an education and partly because I wanted an excuse to be far away from my family. I chose a school in Florida, 1,000 miles from our hometown in Ohio. The distance was healing in ways I hadn't expected. I made friends who actually wanted to spend time with me, who invited me to their holiday gatherings without making me feel like I was begging for scraps. I spent Thanksgiving with my roommate's family one year, and I almost cried when her mother set a place for me at the main table, right between her own children. No basement. No laundry room. No car. Just a chair and a plate and a warm smile. That was the first holiday in my memory where I felt like I belonged. But the pull of family is strong, even when that family has failed you. I kept going back for the major holidays, convincing myself that this time would be different. It never was. Each visit followed the same script. I would arrive with gifts and a hopeful heart. I would be directed to whatever cramped, uncomfortable space they had designated for me. I would watch Claire and her family occupy all the best spots, all the attention, all the love. I would smile and pretend it didn't hurt. And then I would drive home feeling hollow and foolish for having expected anything else. The breaking point came 3 years ago, on Christmas Eve. I was 32 years old, gainfully employed as a graphic designer, financially stable and emotionally exhausted. I had driven 12 hours from Florida to Ohio, battling holiday traffic and a winter storm, because my mother had called and said, "We would really love to see you, Ellie. It's been too long." Those words had sounded like an invitation, like a bridge being extended across the chasm of years and neglect. I had allowed myself to hope. When I arrived at the house, the driveway was already full. Claire's minivan, Mark's truck, my parents' sedan. I parked on the street and carried my bag through the snow to the front door. My mother answered, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face lit up when she saw me, and for one beautiful moment, I thought everything had changed. "Ellie, you made it," she said, hugging me briefly. We had to rearrange a few things because Claire's kids wanted to sleep in the study this year. They're so excited about the Christmas tree. You understand. I understood. I always understood. "We put you in the basement again," she continued, already turning away. "The fold-out is actually pretty comfortable. Your father put a new mattress on it." The basement. Of course. The same basement I had been relegated to since I was 9 years old. I was a grown woman with a career and a car and a life, and I was still being sent to the basement like a misbehaving child. But I didn't say anything. I just carried my bag down the familiar stairs and set it on the same musty couch. The new mattress was a thin piece of foam on top of the old springs. It was not comfortable. Christmas morning was chaotic in the way that Christmas mornings with young children always are. Claire's kids, ages 6 and 4, tore through their presents with gleeful abandon. Claire and Mark exchanged expensive gifts. My parents gave each other jewelry and books. And then it was my turn. My mother handed me a small box wrapped in slightly crumpled paper. I opened it to find a pair of gloves, the kind you buy at a gas station for $5. They were too small and the wrong color. I thanked her anyway. Claire opened her gift from our parents next. It was a check for $5,000, which they handed her with great ceremony. For the kids' college fund, my father announced. Claire cried and hugged them both. I sat there with my gas station gloves and tried not to feel the gaping hole where my heart used to be. After the presents were opened, after the breakfast casserole had been eaten, after the dishes had been washed and put away, I stepped outside onto the back porch. The snow had stopped falling and the world was quiet and white. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the cold air, trying to steady myself. My sister found me there. "Hey, Ellie," she said, leaning against the railing. "You okay?" I almost laughed. Was I okay? I had just been given another reminder of my place in this family, another demonstration of my insignificance. But Claire's face showed genuine concern, or what looked like genuine concern. I had learned not to trust that look. "I'm fine," I said. "Just getting some air." "Mom feels bad about the basement," Claire said. "But you know how it is. The kids need their own space, and Mark's back has been bothering him. The guest bed is better for him." The guest bed. The guest room that my parents had built specifically for Claire's family, with its new mattress and its fresh paint and its closet full of toys for the grandchildren. I had never slept in that room. I had never been offered that room. It was as if the concept of me having needs, having comfort, having a right to physical space simply did not occur to anyone. "It's fine," I said. Claire nodded, apparently satisfied. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about Easter. Mom and Dad are thinking of hosting, but they're worried about space again. Mark's parents might come this year, so things will be even tighter. I hope you understand if we have to do the basement thing again." It was December, and she was already making plans for April, already figuring out how to push me into the basement before the holiday had even been announced. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly or dramatically, but quietly, like a thread finally breaking under too much weight. "Actually," I said, "I might not make it for Easter. Work has been busy." Claire shrugged. "Okay, well, let us know. The door is always open." She said this as if it were true, as if the door had ever been anything but cracked open just enough for me to squeeze through while everyone else walked through grand entrances. I stayed for the rest of Christmas Day, eating dinner, playing games, smiling for photos. But I was already gone, already separating myself from this family that had never really made room for me. When I left the next morning, I hugged each person goodbye. My mother felt thin and brittle in my arms. My father was distracted, already talking about the after-Christmas sales. Claire gave me a quick squeeze and said, "Drive safe, Ellie. See you at Easter." I said maybe, and we both knew I was lying. That drive back to Florida was the longest 12 hours of my life. I had so much time to think, so much time to replay every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering where I had been an afterthought at best and a nuisance at worst. I thought about the time I had flown home for my mother's 50th birthday party, only to find that no one had saved me a seat at the main table. I had eaten my dinner at the kids' table with Claire's children, who were 7 and 5 at the time. I thought about the Thanksgiving when I had offered to bring homemade pies, spending hours in the kitchen perfecting my recipes, only to have my mother put them in the garage because Claire had brought store-bought cookies and they needed the refrigerator space for those instead. I thought about the 4th of July when I had driven 8 hours each way for a 24-hour visit, only to be told that there was no room for me to sleep anywhere, not even the basement. Because Claire's in-laws had taken the basement and my parents had given my spot to a neighbor who needed a place to crash. I had slept in my car that night too, in July humidity instead of November cold, and again, no one had asked, no one had cared. I thought about all of it, and by the time I crossed into Florida, I had made a decision. I was done hoping. I was done begging for scraps of affection. I was done accepting the basement and the laundry room and the back seat of my own car. I was done being grateful for gas station gloves while my sister received $5,000. I was done making myself smaller so that everyone else could take up more space. I was done. The next 3 years were quiet. I didn't announce my decision to my family. I didn't make a dramatic scene or write a scathing letter. I simply stopped showing up. When my mother called to invite me to Easter, I said I had to work. When my father texted about Thanksgiving, I said I already had plans with friends. When Claire sent a group message about Christmas, I didn't respond at all. I didn't explain myself. I didn't justify my absence. I just withdrew, like a turtle pulling into its shell. At first, they didn't seem to notice. That was the most painful part. Weeks went by without a call or a text. I watched my phone, waiting for someone to ask why I had stopped coming, to express concern, to wonder if I was okay. No one did. My absence was as invisible as my presence had always been. I was like a background character who had been written out of the script, and no one in the audience even noticed. But then something shifted. A few months into my self-imposed exile, my mother started calling more often. Her voice had a new tone, something between curiosity and concern. "We miss you, Ellie," she would say. "The holidays aren't the same without you." I wanted to believe her. A part of me, the wounded child who still lived somewhere deep inside, wanted desperately to believe that I mattered, that my absence had created a hole that could not be filled. But another part of me, the part that remembered the basement and the car and the gas station gloves, knew better. They didn't miss me. They missed having someone to absorb the inconvenience. They missed having a scapegoat, a failsafe, a person who could be pushed to the margins so that everyone else could remain comfortable. I was useful to them in my invisibility, and now that I had taken myself out of the equation, they were feeling the strain. Claire started texting me too, usually late at night when the kids were asleep and she had a moment to herself. Her messages were always vague, always skirting the edges of something deeper. "Thinking of you," she would write. Or, "Hope you're doing okay." I would respond with brief, polite answers, giving her nothing to hold on to. I wasn't ready to have the conversation that needed to happen. I wasn't ready to say the words that had been building inside me for 25 years. So I stayed quiet and I stayed away, and I built a new life for myself in Florida. That new life was better than I had ever imagined. Without the annual pilgrimage to Ohio, I had more time and more money and more emotional energy. I focused on my career, landing several high-profile clients that boosted my reputation and my income. I joined a book club and a hiking group, making friends who actually wanted to spend time with me, who invited me to their homes without making me sleep in their basements. I started dating casually, not looking for anything serious, but enjoying the company of people who saw me as a person rather than a placeholder. I adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Gus who loved me unconditionally and never made me feel like I was a burden. Gus slept on my bed every night, curled up against my legs, and that was more warmth and comfort than my family had ever provided. I also started saving money with a specific goal in mind. For years, I had rented a small apartment, a perfectly adequate but unremarkable space. I had never allowed myself to dream bigger because I had always kept one foot out the door, always assuming that I would eventually move back to Ohio, that I would eventually reconcile with my family, that I would eventually be accepted. But that assumption had been a prison, holding me back from building a life that was truly mine. Once I let it go, once I accepted that my family might never change, might never see me, might never love me the way I needed to be loved, I felt free to want things. And what I wanted more than anything was a home. A real home, with walls that belonged to me and rooms that no one could relegate me to because I was the one making the rules. After 2 years of aggressive saving, I had enough for a down payment on a small house in a quiet neighborhood near the water. It wasn't a mansion, nothing like my parents' sprawling colonial or Claire's updated suburban 4-bedroom. It was a modest 2-bedroom bungalow with a screened-in porch and a tiny backyard. But it was mine. Every nail, every tile, every light fixture had been chosen by me, paid for by me, installed for me. I painted the walls a soft blue that reminded me of the ocean. I hung my own artwork, pieces I had collected over the years from local artists and flea markets. I built a bookshelf and filled it with my favorite novels. I planted a garden in the backyard, tomatoes and basil and marigolds, and I watched them grow under the Florida sun. Gus had his own bed in the corner of the living room, though he still preferred to sleep with me. I was happy. For the first time in my life, I was truly, deeply happy. The closing was in early October, and I spent the next few weeks settling in, making the space my own. I was so absorbed in the joy of homeownership that I almost forgot about the approaching holiday season. Almost. But the calendar doesn't lie, and by mid-November, I could feel the familiar anxiety creeping back. Thanksgiving was 2 weeks away. Christmas was 6 weeks after that. For the past 3 years, I had avoided these holidays by staying home, by making other plans, by pretending that I didn't care. But this year was different. This year, I had a home. This year, I had a place that was undeniably mine. And this year, my family had apparently decided that they wanted to be part of it. It started with a phone call from my mother on a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, making pasta for dinner, when my phone buzzed. I saw her name on the screen and almost didn't answer. But some old habit, some lingering sense of obligation, made me pick up. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Ellie, there you are. I've been trying to reach you all day." Her voice was bright, almost giddy, which was unusual for her. My mother was not a giddy person. She was practical and efficient, the kind of woman who made lists and followed schedules. Giddiness was out of character. "I've been busy," I said. "What's going on?" "Well, we have some exciting news," she said. "Your father and I have been talking, and we've decided that we need a change of scenery for the holidays this year. Ohio winters are just too harsh, and we're not getting any younger. So we thought, why not come to Florida? Why not spend Thanksgiving and Christmas somewhere warm?" I felt a cold trickle of dread run down my spine. "You want to come to Florida for the holidays?" "Exactly. And we know you just bought that lovely house. We saw the pictures you posted online. It's adorable, Ellie. Absolutely adorable. And it has that guest room, doesn't it? The one you painted blue? That would be perfect for your father and me. And Claire and Mark could take the other bedroom, and the kids could sleep on the couch or maybe an air mattress. It will be tight, but we'll make it work. Family always finds a way. Family always finds a way." The irony of that phrase, coming from her lips, was almost too much to bear. For 25 years, my family had not found a way to include me. They had not found a way to give me a proper bed, a proper seat at the table, a proper place in their hearts. They had found ways to exclude me, to push me aside, to make me feel like an intruder in my own family. And now that I had built something of my own, now that I had a house and a life and a measure of peace, they wanted to swoop in and claim it for themselves. "Mom," I said slowly, "I haven't even finished unpacking. The house isn't ready for guests." "Oh, nonsense," she said. "We don't need anything fancy. Just a place to sleep and a bathroom to use. We can help you unpack while we're there. It will be like a working holiday. Fun for everyone. Fun for everyone. Except me. Because I knew how this would go. They would arrive with their suitcases and their expectations. They would take over my space, my kitchen, my living room. They would make messes that I would clean up. They would eat my food and drink my coffee and leave their dirty dishes in my sink. Claire's kids would run through my house, touching my things, maybe breaking something precious. Mark would complain about the air mattress hurting his back, and my mother would look at me with those expectant eyes, waiting for me to offer him my bed. And I would. Because that's what I had always done. I had always given in, given up, given away the best parts of myself to make room for people who would never do the same for me. But not this time. "Mom," I said, putting down my wooden spoon and leaning against the counter, "I need to think about this. It's a lot to take in." "Don't think too long," she said lightly. "We're already looking at flights. We were thinking of arriving the Tuesday before Thanksgiving and staying through the weekend after Christmas. What do you think? 6 weeks? That gives us plenty of time to really enjoy the Florida weather." 6 weeks. She wanted to stay in my house for 6 weeks. My 2-bedroom bungalow with its tiny backyard and its single bathroom. 6 weeks of my mother's opinions, my father's television blaring, Claire's passive-aggressive comments, Mark's complaints, and 2 small children with endless energy and no respect for personal space. 6 weeks of being pushed to the margins of my own home, of sleeping on my own couch while my sister took my bed, of cooking and cleaning and catering to people who had never once catered to me. "I'll call you back," I said, and I hung up before she could respond. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the pot of pasta water that had started to boil over. Gus came trotting in from the living room, his nails clicking on the tile floor, and sat at my feet, looking up at me with those big brown eyes. I reached down and scratched behind his ears, and he leaned into my hand, content and trusting. He didn't know that my family was trying to invade our peaceful home. He didn't know that I was standing on the edge of a decision that would change everything. He just knew that I was his person, and he was my dog, and that was enough. I wished it could be that simple for me. Over the next few days, my phone did not stop buzzing. My mother called multiple times, leaving voicemails that grew progressively more impatient. My father texted, which was unusual because he rarely used technology. "Your mother is excited about Florida," he wrote. "Don't disappoint her." Claire sent a series of messages in the family group chat, which I had muted years ago, but still checked occasionally out of morbid curiosity. She posted links to local attractions in my area, Disney World and Universal Studios and the beach, as if they were already planning their itinerary. She tagged me in every post, writing things like, "Can't wait to see you, Aunt Ellie, and the kids are so excited to stay at your new house." I did not respond to any of it. The pressure was intense, but so was my resolve. I had spent my entire life accommodating people who would not accommodate me. I had swallowed my pride, swallowed my anger, swallowed my hurt, again and again and again. I had told myself that family was family, that blood was thicker than water, that I owed them my presence and my patience no matter how poorly they treated me. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped believing those lies. Somewhere along the way, I had started to believe that I deserved better. On Friday evening, a week after my mother's initial call, I received a message that pushed me from indecision into action. It was from Claire, sent directly to me rather than the group chat. "Hey Ellie," it read. "Mom told me you're being difficult about the Florida trip. I just want you to know that we're all really looking forward to this. The kids haven't seen you in years, and they miss you. Mark's job has been stressful, and he needs a break. Dad's health isn't what it used to be, and the warm weather would be good for him. This is bigger than just you. We're counting on you to step up and be part of this family. Please don't let us down. Step up. Be part of this family. Don't let us down." The same phrases they had used my whole life, the same guilt wrapped in the same pretty paper. But this time, I saw them for what they were. Manipulation. Control. A way of making their wants into my obligations. There was no concern in Claire's message, no question about what I might need or want or hope for. There was only expectation, the heavy weight of their collective desire pressing down on me, daring me to refuse. I set my phone down and walked into my backyard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Gus followed me out, sniffing at the marigolds, chasing a butterfly. I sat on the steps of my screened-in porch and let the warm Florida air wash over me. This was my home. These were my flowers, my dog, my sunset. I had built this life from nothing, with no help from them, despite their neglect. And I would not let them take it from me. I went back inside and picked up my phone. I opened the group chat, the one I had been ignoring for days, and I typed out a message. My hands were shaking, but my words were steady. "I've been thinking about your request to stay at my house for the holidays," I wrote. "And I've decided that it's not going to work for me. My home is not ready for guests, and I am not ready to host a family gathering. I hope you understand. I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and a Merry Christmas, but you will need to make other arrangements." I hit send before I could change my mind. For a moment, there was silence. Then my phone exploded. My mother was the first to respond. "Excuse me? What do you mean it's not going to work? We already booked our flights." I knew this was a lie. They had been talking about flights, but they hadn't actually booked anything yet. My mother was a planner, and she would never book flights without firm confirmation from me. But she was using the lie as a weapon, trying to make me feel guilty for something that hadn't even happened. My father's response was shorter and sharper. "This is not up for discussion. We are coming. End of story." Claire's response was the longest and the most hurtful. "Ellie, I can't believe you would do this. After everything our family has done for you. All those years Mom and Dad paid for your college, gave you a place to live, supported you when you were struggling. And this is how you repay them? By shutting them out? By refusing to share your home with the people who love you? You need to take a hard look at yourself and figure out why you're being so selfish. This isn't about you. It's about all of us. It's about family. And if you can't see that, then maybe you don't deserve to be part of this family." That last sentence hit me like a physical blow. Maybe you don't deserve to be part of this family. I had spent my whole life trying to deserve a place in that family, trying to earn love that should have been given freely, trying to prove that I was worthy of sitting at the same table, sleeping in a real bed, receiving gifts that weren't afterthoughts. And now, after all of that, I was being told that I didn't deserve them. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. But something else happened in that moment. Something I hadn't expected. Instead of crumbling, instead of apologizing and begging for forgiveness, I felt a surge of anger so pure and so powerful that it burned away the last traces of my guilt. They were trying to manipulate me again, trying to use the threat of rejection to make me comply. But I had already been rejected. I had been rejected my entire life. And I had survived. I had built something beautiful out of the wreckage of their neglect. I didn't need them anymore. I had never needed them. I had only wanted them, wanted the love and acceptance that every child deserves, and they had refused to give it to me. That was their failure, not mine. I picked up my phone again and typed out my final message. I kept it short because I knew that any explanation I gave would be twisted and used against me. I have spent my entire life making room for you, I wrote. I have slept in basements and laundry rooms and the back seat of my car so that you could be comfortable. I have accepted scraps and leftovers and gas station gifts, while Claire received checks and new bikes and the guest room. I have been quiet and grateful and invisible because I thought that if I was good enough, you would finally see me. But you never did. You never will. So no, you cannot stay in my house. Not for 6 weeks. Not for 6 days. Not for 6 hours. This is my home, and for once in my life, I am not making room for you. Happy holidays. I sent the message, and then I did something I had never done before. I left the group chat. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked my father's number. I blocked Claire's number. I blocked Mark's number. I didn't block my nieces because they were children and they had done nothing wrong, but I knew they wouldn't be reaching out anyway. They were too young, too wrapped up in their own lives to think about their aunt who lived far away. Then I turned off my phone, made myself a cup of tea, and sat on my screened-in porch with Gus in my lap. The stars were coming out, scattered across the Florida sky like tiny diamonds. I could hear the distant sound of waves, the ocean that was only a few blocks away, and the soft rustle of palm fronds in the breeze. My house was quiet. My house was peaceful. My house was mine. The silence lasted for about 2 hours. Then someone started pounding on my front door. I almost didn't answer it. It was after 9 o'clock, and I wasn't expecting anyone. But the pounding was insistent, the kind of knocking that came from someone who was not going to go away. Gus started barking, his small body vibrating with alarm. I picked him up, held him against my chest, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw my mother's face, distorted by the fisheye lens but unmistakable. Behind her were my father, Claire, Mark, and my 2 nieces, 6-year-old Hannah and 4-year-old Chloe. They were all standing on my front porch in Florida in November with suitcases. My heart stopped. Then it started racing so fast I thought I might pass out. How had they gotten here? How had they found my address? I had never given it to them, had been careful not to post anything that would reveal my location beyond the general area. But then I remembered the pictures I had posted online, the ones my mother had mentioned. I had tagged the city, a small coastal town that was easy to find. They must have searched real estate listings, matched the details from my photos, figured out exactly which house was mine. The realization made me feel violated, exposed, as if they had broken into my diary and read my most private thoughts. I thought about not opening the door. I thought about turning off the lights and pretending I wasn't home. But I could see them through the peephole, all 5 of them, standing there with their expectant faces and their rolling suitcases. They had come all this way. They had driven or flown or taken a bus, spent money and time and energy to ambush me in my own home. They were not going to leave just because I didn't answer the door. So I unlocked the deadbolt, took a deep breath, and opened the door. "Ellie," my mother exclaimed, pushing past me into the living room. "There you are. We were so worried when you stopped answering your phone. We thought something had happened to you. Something had happened to me." I had finally stood up for myself, and they had responded by invading my home. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gus was squirming in my arms, growling at the strangers who had barged into his territory. "We're here for the holidays, of course," my father said, stepping inside and looking around with critical eyes. "Nice place. Smaller than we expected, but nice. Where should we put our bags?" Claire asked, already walking toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "The kids are exhausted. It was a long flight. They hadn't flown." I could see the rental car in my driveway, a minivan with Ohio plates and a layer of road dust. They had driven 20 hours at least, maybe more with traffic and stops. They had driven 20 hours to ambush me on a Friday night. "Stop," I said. The word came out louder than I intended, and everyone froze. Even Gus stopped growling. "Stop right there. You cannot come into my house like this. You did not ask permission. You did not give me any warning. You just showed up on my doorstep and pushed your way inside." My mother turned to look at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "We told you we were coming, Ellie. We discussed it. You knew we were planning this trip." "I told you it wasn't going to work for me," I said. "I told you that you needed to make other arrangements. You chose to ignore me." "We thought you were just being difficult," Claire said, rolling her eyes. "You do that sometimes. You get into these moods where you push everyone away. We're used to it. We don't take it personally. These moods." The dismissive phrase hit me like a slap. She was talking about my entire childhood, my teenage years, my adulthood. Every time I had been hurt, Every time I had withdrawn, every time I had tried to protect myself from their neglect, they had labeled it as a mood, a phase, a quirk of my personality that they could safely ignore. They had never once asked themselves why I was pushing them away. They had never once considered that maybe, just maybe, they were the ones who had pushed me first. "This is not a mood," I said, my voice shaking. "This is me telling you, clearly and directly, that you are not welcome to stay in my home. You need to leave. Now." Silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, almost suffocating. My nieces were staring at me with wide eyes, not understanding what was happening. Hannah tugged on Claire's sleeve. "Mommy, is Aunt Ellie mad at us?" Claire crouched down and whispered something in Hannah's ear, too quiet for me to hear. Hannah nodded, but she kept looking at me with those big, confused eyes. I felt a pang of guilt, quickly suppressed. The children were innocent. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. But their parents had chosen to bring them here, had chosen to use them as shields, had chosen to turn a family dispute into a spectacle. My father stepped forward, his face reddening. "You listen to me, young lady. We drove 20 hours to see you. We spent money we didn't have on gas and food and that rental car. We are not leaving just because you're throwing a tantrum. This is your family. We belong here. You belong in your own home," I said. "In Ohio, where you have a guest room and a basement and a study and plenty of space for everyone. I have 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. I have a life that I built without any help from you. You do not get to claim it now because it's convenient for you." "Convenient?" my mother said, her voice rising. "Is that what you think this is? Convenience? Your father and I are getting older, Ellie. We won't be around forever. We're trying to spend time with you, to connect with you, to be a family. And you're throwing it back in our faces. You had 25 years to connect with me," I said, and now the tears were coming, hot and unwanted. 25 years of holidays where I slept in the basement or the laundry room or my car. 25 years of birthdays where Claire got checks and I got socks. 25 years of being told there was no room for me. And now that I finally have room for myself, you want to pretend that none of that happened? You want to show up at my door and act like we're one big happy family?" Claire stood up, her face hardening. "Here we go. The victim act. You've been doing this since we were kids, Ellie. Always whining about how unfair everything is. Mom and Dad did the best they could. They had limited resources, and they had to make choices. You were always so difficult, so sensitive, so hard to please. It wasn't their fault that they couldn't make you happy. Limited resources. My parents had never been wealthy, but they had never been poor either. They had owned their home outright, had 2 reliable cars, had taken vacations to Disney World and the beach. But somehow, there had never been enough money to buy me a bicycle or a new doll or a birthday cake. There had never been enough space to give me a real bedroom or even a consistent place to sleep. The resources had always been just scarce enough to exclude me, but never so scarce that Claire had to go without. "Sensitive," I repeated, tasting the word like poison. "Is that what you call it when a child cries because she's sleeping in a cold basement while her sister is warm in a guest room? Is that sensitive or is that human?" "You always exaggerated," Mark said, speaking for the first time. He was standing by the door, arms crossed, looking bored. "It wasn't that bad. You had a roof over your head and food on the table. A lot of kids don't even have that." I turned to look at him, this man who had married into my family and somehow already understood the dynamics better than I ever had. He knew the script. He knew his role. He was supposed to defend his wife, to minimize my pain, to make me seem unreasonable. And he was doing it perfectly. "You're right," I said quietly. "A lot of kids don't have a roof or food. I was lucky in that way. But luck doesn't erase neglect. Luck doesn't make up for being forgotten, overlooked, pushed aside. I had a roof, but I never had a home. Not until now." My mother's face crumpled. For a moment, I thought she was actually going to cry, actually going to acknowledge the pain she had caused. But then her features hardened, and I realized that her tears were not for me. They were for herself. She was crying because her plans had been disrupted, because her vision of a warm Florida holiday had been shattered, because I was refusing to play my assigned role. "Fine," she said, her voice brittle. "If that's how you feel, we'll leave. But don't come crying to us when you're lonely. Don't come begging for our love when you have no one else. You're making a choice, Ellie. You're choosing to be alone." I almost laughed. Alone. She thought I was alone. She didn't know about my friends, my book club, my hiking group. She didn't know about the potluck dinners and the game nights and the spontaneous beach trips. She didn't know about Gus, curled up in my lap, his heart beating against mine. She didn't know that I had built a community, a chosen family, people who saw me and valued me and made room for me without being asked. She didn't know because she had never asked. She had never wanted to know. I was a character in her story, and she had written me as lonely and desperate and grateful for any scrap of attention she chose to throw my way. But that character was fiction. I had rewritten my own story, and in my story, I was the hero. I'm not alone, I said. I have never been more surrounded by love than I am right now. And I'm not begging for anything. Not anymore. You can keep your conditional love, your basement, your gas station gloves. I don't need them. I don't want them. I want you to leave my house. My father opened his mouth to argue, but something in my face must have stopped him. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Not understanding, not remorse, but recognition. He saw that I was not going to back down. He saw that the little girl who had always given in, always apologized, always made herself small, was gone. In her place was a woman who had drawn a line, and that line was not going to move. Let's go, he said, grabbing 2 of the suitcases. We'll find a hotel. A hotel? My mother sputtered. Robert, we can't afford a hotel for 6 weeks. We didn't budget for that. Then we'll go home, he said. We'll drive back tonight. Tonight? Are you insane? The kids are exhausted. We're all exhausted. We need to sleep. I watched them argue, this man and woman who had raised me, and I felt a strange sense of detachment. They were like characters in a play, repeating lines they had spoken 1,000 times before. My mother, the planner, the organizer, always looking for the best deal, the most efficient solution. My father, the pragmatist, willing to cut his losses when a situation became untenable. They had played these roles my entire life, and I had always been caught in the middle, trying to mediate, trying to please, trying to make everyone happy. But not anymore. I was no longer the mediator. I was no longer the pleaser. I was no longer responsible for their happiness, or their comfort, or their holiday plans. If you need a place to stay tonight, there's a motel about 2 miles down the road, I said. It's not fancy, but it's clean. I can give you the address. My mother stared at me as if I had suggested they sleep in a ditch. A motel? Ellie, we're your family. We came all this way to see you. And you're sending us to a motel. I'm not sending you anywhere, I said. I'm telling you that you cannot stay here. Where you go from here is your choice. Claire stepped forward, her eyes blazing. You are the most selfish person I have ever met. You know that? We drove 20 hours because we wanted to be with you. We wanted to give you a chance to be part of this family. And you're throwing it away because of some petty grudges from decades ago. Grow up, Ellie. Get over it yourself. Petty grudges. Decades ago. She made it sound like I was upset about a broken toy or a lost game. She made it sound like my pain was trivial, insignificant, not worth acknowledging. But the pain was not trivial. It was the accumulated weight of thousands of small wounds, thousands of forgotten birthdays, thousands of nights spent in cold basements and parked cars. It was the knowledge that my own mother and father had never loved me the way they loved my sister. It was the certainty that nothing I did would ever be enough to earn their approval. And Claire wanted me to get over it, to move on, to pretend that none of it had ever happened. She wanted me to keep playing my role, to keep absorbing the inconvenience, to keep making myself small so that she and her family could be large. And she was calling me selfish because I had finally refused. I'm not going to argue with you, I said, stepping back and opening the door wider. You need to leave. All of you. Now. For a long moment, no one moved. My mother and father exchanged glances. Claire looked at Mark, who shrugged. The children clung to their parents' legs, tired and confused. I stood my ground, Gus still in my arms, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. Finally, my father picked up the suitcases again. We'll go, he said. But don't expect us to come back. This bridge is burned. I wanted to say that the bridge had been burning for 25 years, and they had been the ones holding the matches. But I didn't. I just nodded and watched as they filed out of my house, one by one. My mother was the last to leave. She paused in the doorway, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't read. You'll regret this, she said. Someday, when you're old and alone, you'll look back on this moment and wish you had made a different choice. Maybe, I said. But I doubt it. She walked out, and I closed the door behind her. I locked the deadbolt, then the chain, then the little slide bolt that I had installed on the inside for extra security. I watched through the window as they loaded themselves into the rental minivan, as the headlights came on, as the engine started. The van sat in my driveway for a long time, exhaust curling into the night air. I could see them inside, arguing, gesturing, pointing at the house. Then the van backed out of the driveway and drove away, its taillights disappearing around the corner. I stood at the window for a long time after they were gone. Gus had stopped shaking and was now licking my chin, trying to comfort me. I held him close and let the tears come. Not tears of sadness, exactly, and not tears of relief. They were something in between, a release of all the pressure that had been building inside me for decades. I cried for the little girl who had slept in the basement, for the teenager who had eaten at the kids' table, for the young woman who had spent Christmas in her car. I cried for all the versions of myself that had been told there was no room, that had been made to feel like a burden, that had been taught that love was something you had to earn rather than something you deserved. And then, when the tears were spent, I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and walked into my kitchen. I made myself a bowl of pasta, the same pasta I had been making when my mother called a week ago. I sat at my small kitchen table, in my small kitchen, in my small house, and I ate. Gus sat at my feet, hoping for scraps. I gave him a piece of chicken, and he wagged his tail so hard his whole body wiggled. I smiled. It was a small smile, fragile and uncertain, but it was real. The next few weeks were quiet. I waited for another knock on the door, another ambush, but it never came. My family had retreated back to Ohio, back to their comfortable house with its guest room and its basement and its study. I imagined them eating Thanksgiving dinner without me, sitting around the table, making the same jokes, telling the same stories. I wondered if they mentioned me, if they discussed what had happened, if they felt any regret. Probably not. Probably they had already rewritten the narrative, casting me as the villain who had ruined the holidays, the ungrateful daughter who had rejected her loving family. It was easier that way, easier to blame me than to look at themselves. I didn't care. Or rather, I was learning not to care. It was a process, a skill I was developing day by day. Some days were harder than others. Some days I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, a sense of loss that I couldn't quite name. I missed the idea of a family, the fantasy of what we could have been. I missed the hope that had kept me going for so many years, even though that hope had been based on a lie. Letting go of hope was its own kind of grief, and I allowed myself to feel it. I didn't push it away or pretend it wasn't there. I sat with it, acknowledged it, and let it pass through me. On the days when the grief was too heavy, I leaned on my chosen family. My friend Sarah came over with a bottle of wine and a homemade apple pie. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She just sat with me on the screened-in porch, drinking wine and watching the sunset, while Gus chased fireflies in the backyard. My hiking group invited me on a Thanksgiving morning trail walk, and we ended up at a diner where we ate pancakes and laughed about nothing in particular. My book club did a gift exchange in early December, and I received a beautiful journal with a handwritten note from one of the members, "For your next chapter." I cried when I read that, but they were good tears. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it at Sarah's house, along with a dozen other friends who had nowhere else to go. We cooked together, ate together, cleaned up together. No one slept in a basement or a car. There was room for everyone because we made room for everyone. That was the difference. That was what my family had never understood. Love wasn't about scarcity or competition or earning your place. Love was about abundance, about opening your doors and your heart and trusting that there would be enough. My friends understood that. My family never had. Christmas was harder. I had always loved Christmas, even the ones spent in basements and laundry rooms. There was something magical about the lights and the music and the general sense of goodwill. But that first Christmas alone, without even the possibility of my family, was rough. I decorated my house anyway, stringing lights along the porch and hanging a wreath on the door. I bought a small tree, real this time, not the artificial one I had used in my apartment. I decorated it with ornaments I had collected over the years, each one holding a memory. There was the sea turtle ornament from my first trip to the beach, the handmade star from a coworker, the tiny book from my favorite independent bookstore. Gus got a new sweater, red with white trim, and he looked so adorable that I took approximately 1,000 pictures. On Christmas Eve, I baked cookies. I made too many, more than I could ever eat, so I packed them into tins and delivered them to my neighbors. Everyone was surprised and grateful. The elderly couple next door invited me in for eggnog. The young family across the street asked if I wanted to join them for Christmas dinner. I declined gently, because I had already made plans with Sarah and her family, but I appreciated the gesture. I was not alone. I had never been more surrounded by community. Christmas morning, I woke up early. Gus was curled up at the foot of the bed, snoring softly. I lay there for a while, listening to the quiet, feeling the warmth of the sunshine streaming through the curtains. There were no children shrieking with joy, no parents arguing about gravy, no sister making passive-aggressive comments. There was just me and my dog and the soft hum of the ceiling fan. It was peaceful. It was enough. I made coffee and sat by the tree, opening the small pile of presents I had bought for myself. A new pair of running shoes. A cookbook I had been wanting. A gift certificate to my favorite local bookstore. None of it was extravagant, but it was all exactly what I wanted because I had chosen it for myself. I didn't need anyone else to buy me gifts. I didn't need anyone else to validate my existence. I could do that for myself. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen, expecting a message from Sarah or one of my other friends. Instead, I saw a name I hadn't seen in weeks. My mother. She had found a way to reach me, probably using a different phone number or a messaging app one hadn't blocked. The message was short. Merry Christmas, Ellie. We hope you're happy. I stared at those words for a long time, trying to decipher their meaning. Was it a genuine olive branch, a tentative step toward reconciliation? Or was it another manipulation, another attempt to make me feel guilty for choosing myself? I didn't know. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't need to know. I didn't need to analyze her intentions or decode her hidden meanings. I didn't need to respond at all. I set the phone down and picked up my coffee. Gus stirred, stretched, and climbed into my lap. I scratched behind his ears and watched the sun rise over my little house, my little garden, my little life. It wasn't the life I had imagined as a child. It wasn't the life my family had wanted for me. But it was mine. And that was more than enough. 3 months later, I received a letter. Actual paper, actual envelope, actual postage stamp. It was from my father, which surprised me because he had never been one for written correspondence. The letter was short and to the point, written in his cramped, barely legible handwriting. Ellie, your mother is sick. Nothing life-threatening, but she's having some procedures done, and it would mean a lot if you could come home. She doesn't want to ask you herself because of what happened, but I'm asking. Please. We're your parents. You only get one set. Don't let pride keep you from being here when it matters. I read the letter 3 times. My mother was sick. Not life-threatening, but sick enough that my father had broken his silence to reach out. I felt a familiar tug, the old pull of obligation and guilt. I should go. That was what good daughters did. They put aside their grievances and showed up when it mattered. They didn't hold grudges. They didn't let pride keep them from being there for their family. But then I remembered. I remembered the basement and the laundry room and the back seat of my car. I remembered the gas station gloves and the kids' table and the $5,000 check. I remembered the ambush at my front door, the manipulation, the guilt trips, the endless, exhausting cycle of hoping and being disappointed. I remembered that I had already shown up. I had shown up for 25 years, and it had never been enough. And now, when I had finally stopped showing up, they wanted me to come back. They wanted me to drop everything, travel 1,000 miles, and stand by my mother's bedside as if nothing had happened. As if the years of neglect had been a dream. As if I had not spent my entire childhood learning that I was invisible. I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote a letter in return. I kept it brief. Dad, I'm sorry to hear that Mom is sick, and I hope she recovers quickly. But I will not be coming to Ohio. Not for this. Not for anything. If and when I am ready to see you again, I will reach out. Until then, please respect my decision. I have spent my whole life making room for you. Now I am making room for myself. I mailed the letter the next day. I did not expect a response, and I did not receive one. The silence from Ohio stretched on, week after week, month after month. I heard nothing from my mother, my father, or Claire. It was as if I had ceased to exist for them, which, in a way, I had. I was no longer the convenient scapegoat, the invisible placeholder, the one who could be pushed to the margins without complaint. I was gone, and they had let me go. That silence was both freeing and painful. Freeing because I no longer had to brace myself for the next manipulation, the next guilt trip, the next reminder of my place in their hierarchy. Painful because it confirmed what I had always suspected, that their love for me was conditional, fragile, easily withdrawn. If I had been truly important to them, they would have fought for me. They would have called, written, driven down to Florida to apologize, to make amends, to try to understand. But they did none of those things. They simply let me go, and that told me everything I needed to know. The years that followed were good years. Not perfect, not without challenges, but fundamentally good. I continued to build my life in Florida, deepening my friendships, advancing in my career, filling my small house with love and laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals. Gus grew older and grayer, but no less devoted. I adopted a second dog, a lazy old beagle named Daisy, who had been surrendered by her previous owners. She and Gus became inseparable, two oddballs who had found a home with me. I dated a few people, had a couple of short-term relationships, but nothing that stuck. I wasn't lonely. I had learned that romantic love was not the only kind of love that mattered, and that a full life could be built on friendship and community and the quiet contentment of a life well lived. I traveled when I could, visiting friends in other states, exploring national parks, taking road trips with no particular destination in mind. I wrote in my journal every morning, a practice that helped me process my emotions and stay grounded. I saw a therapist for a while, working through the childhood wounds that still ached from time to time. Therapy helped. It gave me language for what I had experienced, validation for the pain I had carried for so long. My therapist told me something that I have never forgotten. She said, "You are not responsible for fixing a family that broke you." Those words became a kind of mantra, a reminder that I was allowed to protect myself, allowed to set boundaries, allowed to say no. On the 5th anniversary of the ambush, I threw a party. I invited everyone who had become important to me over the years. Sarah and her husband, my book club friends, my hiking group, my neighbors, my coworkers. About 30 people crammed into my little bungalow, spilling out onto the porch and into the backyard. We ate, drank, laughed, and danced to music from a portable speaker. Gus and Daisy ran around getting under everyone's feet, stealing scraps, demanding attention. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely wonderful. At some point in the evening, Sarah pulled me aside. She had a serious look on her face, which was unusual because Sarah was almost never serious. "Ellie," she said, "I need to tell you something." I wasn't going to, but I think you should know. My heart clenched. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "Your sister reached out to me on social media. A few weeks ago. She asked about you. She wanted to know how you were doing, if you were happy, if you ever talked about the family." I felt a wave of dizziness, as if the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Claire had reached out to Sarah. Not to me, not directly, but to my friend. It was such a Claire move, indirect and manipulative, using a third party to gather information without actually committing to anything. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her the truth," Sarah said. "That you're happy. That you have a good life. That you don't talk about them much. But when you do, it's with sadness, not anger." She paused. "She asked me to give you a message. She said that your mother's health has gotten worse. That she's been in and out of the hospital. That the doctors aren't sure how much time she has left." The dizziness intensified. I grabbed the edge of the porch railing to steady myself. My mother was dying. The woman who had neglected me, who had favored my sister, who had tried to ambush me in my own home, was dying. I should have felt something dramatic, something definitive. Relief, maybe. Or grief. Or anger. But what I felt was mostly confusion, a tangled knot of emotions that I couldn't begin to untangle. "Claire said that your mother asks about you," Sarah continued. "She wants to see you. She wants to make things right before the end. Claire said she knows she's asking a lot, but she's asking anyway. She said that you're still family, no matter what happened. And that family should be together at the end. Still family." The phrase echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my memory. For 25 years, I had been told that there was no room for me in the family. I had been pushed to the margins, forgotten, overlooked. And now, when my mother was facing her own mortality, suddenly I was family again. Suddenly, there was room for me. But that room came with conditions. I would have to go to Ohio, would have to sit at my mother's bedside, would have to pretend that the past had not happened or that it didn't matter. I would have to absorb their guilt and their fear and their need for absolution, just as I had absorbed their inconvenience for so many years. I would have to make myself small again, to fit into the space they had carved out for me, the space that had never really been mine. Or I could say no. I could stay in Florida, in my house, with my dogs and my friends and my chosen family. I could protect the peace I had fought so hard to build. I could honor the boundaries I had drawn, the lines I had sworn not to cross. I could choose myself one more time. But my mother was dying. And no matter how much she had hurt me, no matter how many times she had chosen Claire over me, no matter how many holidays I had spent in basements and cars, she was still my mother. She had given me life, however imperfectly. She had fed me and clothed me and kept a roof over my head, even if that roof was often conditional, even if that roof was never quite enough. She was human, flawed and broken and scared, and she was facing the end of her life. Could I really refuse to see her? Could I really let her die without giving her a chance to say whatever she needed to say? I didn't know. I spent the rest of the party in a fog, smiling and laughing on autopilot while my mind churned through the possibilities. Should I go? Should I stay? Should I call Claire and hear what she had to say? Should I maintain my silence, my distance, my hard-won peace? There was no easy answer, no clear right or wrong. There was only a series of choices, each with its own consequences, each leading to a different version of the future. That night, after all the guests had gone home, after the dishes were washed and the leftovers put away, I sat on my screened-in porch with Gus and Daisy. The stars were out, scattered across the Florida sky like tiny diamonds. The same stars I had looked at the night my family ambushed me, the same stars that had witnessed my tears and my resolve. I thought about my mother, lying in a hospital bed hundreds of miles away, surrounded by machines and tubes and the beeping of monitors. I thought about my father, sitting by her side, holding her hand, pretending to be strong. I thought about Claire, running between the hospital and her kids' activities, trying to hold everything together. I thought about the family that had never made room for me, and I wondered if there was still time to change that. Not to erase the past, not to pretend it hadn't happened, but to build something new. Something imperfect and fragile, but something real. I didn't make a decision that night. I didn't make a decision the next day or the day after that. I sat with the question, let it settle into my bones, let it become part of me. I talked to my therapist, who helped me weigh the pros and cons. I talked to Sarah, who reminded me that I didn't owe anyone anything, but that forgiveness, when it was possible, was a gift I could give to myself as much as to them. I talked to myself, the little girl who had slept in the basement, the teenager who had eaten at the kids' table, the woman who had finally stood up and said no. I asked each version of myself what she needed, what she wanted, what she was willing to risk. In the end, I made a choice. It was not a heroic choice, not a dramatic choice. It was a quiet choice, a private choice, a choice that felt right even though it scared me. I decided to go to Ohio. Not because I owed it to my mother, not because I wanted to prove that I was the bigger person, not because I was hoping for some fairy tale reconciliation. I decided to go because I had spent my whole life running away from my family, and I was tired of running. I decided to go because I wanted to look my mother in the eye, one last time, and tell her the truth about what her neglect had done to me. I decided to go because I needed to close the door myself, to make sure it was truly closed, so that I could stop peeking back over my shoulder to see if it was still ajar. I booked a flight for the following week. I arranged for Sarah to watch Gus and Daisy. I packed a small bag, just enough for a few days. I did not tell my family I was coming. I did not want to give them time to prepare, to rehearse, to put on their best faces. I wanted to see them as they were, raw and real and unguarded. I wanted to know once and for all whether there was any room for me in their hearts, or whether I had been right all along. The flight was uneventful. I stared out the window as Ohio unfolded beneath me, green and brown and gray, so different from the bright colors of Florida. I had not been back in 5 years. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier, less significant. The airport, the highway, the neighborhoods. I had built up this place in my mind, made it larger and more menacing than it really was. But it was just a place, full of ordinary people living ordinary lives. My family was just people, flawed and broken and scared, not the giants of love and neglect that I had cast them as. That realization was strangely liberating. They were not all-powerful. They could not hurt me unless I let them. I took a taxi to the hospital, a sprawling complex on the edge of town. The driver asked if I was visiting someone sick, and I said yes. He didn't ask who, and I didn't volunteer. I paid the fare, walked through the automatic doors, and followed the signs to the 4th floor. The elevator smelled like hand sanitizer and fear. I rode it alone, watching the numbers climb, feeling my heart rate climb with them. The door to my mother's room was half open. I could hear the quiet murmur of voices, the beep of monitors, the soft shuffle of feet. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, gathering myself. Then I pushed the door open and walked inside. The room was small and clinical, filled with machines and flowers and get-well cards. My mother was in the bed, looking smaller and frilier than I had ever seen her. Her hair was thin and white, her skin papery and pale. She was sleeping or maybe sedated, her chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. My father sat in a chair beside her, holding her hand. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment, he didn't seem to recognize me. Then his eyes widened, and his mouth fell open. "Ellie," he whispered. "You came." "I came," I said. Claire was standing by the window, looking out at the parking lot. She turned when she heard my voice, and her face cycled through a series of emotions too fast for me to track. Surprise, relief, guilt, hope. She took a step toward me, then stopped, as if she wasn't sure if she was allowed to approach. "I didn't think you would come," she said. "After everything." "Neither did I said. "But here I am." The room fell silent. My father was crying, silent tears streaming down his weathered face. Claire was biting her lip, trying not to cry. I stood in the doorway, an outsider in my own family, watching them grieve and hope and fear. And then my mother stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She looked around the room, taking in the machines, the flowers, the faces. And then her gaze landed on me. "Ellie?" Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Is that really you?" "It's me, Mom," I said, and I walked to her bedside. I didn't take her hand. I wasn't ready for that. But I stood close enough that she could see me, could hear me, could know that I was real. "I dreamed about you," she said. "I dreamed that you came back. That we talked. That I told you." She stopped, her breath catching. My father squeezed her hand. Claire moved closer, standing on the other side of the bed. The four of us, together in that small room, the family that had never made room for me finally gathered in a space that was barely larger than a closet. "You told me what?" I asked, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. My mother closed her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she had fallen asleep again. But then she opened them, and they were clearer than they had been a moment ago, more focused. She looked at me, really looked at me, the way she had never looked at me before. "I told you I was sorry," she said. "I told you that I made mistakes. That I was wrong. That I should have made room for you. That I should have seen you. That I should have loved you better." The words hung in the air, fragile and tentative, like spun glass. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to wrap myself in them and let them heal the wounds that had festered for so long. But I had been burned too many times. I had hoped too many times. I couldn't just accept her apology, not without knowing if it was real, not without knowing if she understood what she was apologizing for. "Why, Mom?" I asked. "Why didn't you see me? Why did you always choose Claire? Why was there never room for me?" My mother's face crumpled. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, tracing paths down her temples and into her thin hair. My father made a sound, a small, wounded noise, but he didn't speak. Claire was crying now too, silent sobs that shook her shoulders. I stood there, unmoving, waiting for an answer that might never come. "I don't know," my mother finally said. "I don't have a good answer." I was afraid, maybe. Claire was easier. She was always happy, always agreeable, always what I needed her to be. You were harder. You felt things more deeply. You asked questions I couldn't answer. You saw through me in ways that scared me. So I pushed you away. I told myself that you didn't need me as much, that you were stronger, that you would be fine on your own. But that was a lie. It was always a lie. You needed me, and I failed you. I failed you over and over again, and I don't know how to make that right. She was crying in earnest now, her frail body shaking with the force of her sobs. My father wrapped his arms around her, holding her together. Claire reached out and took my mother's hand, and for a moment, I felt like an intruder, watching a private moment that I wasn't supposed to see. But then my mother reached out with her other hand, the one that wasn't holding my father's, and she stretched it toward me. "Can you forgive me?" she asked. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I have no right to ask. But I'm asking anyway. Can you forgive me, Ellie?" I looked at that hand, thin and trembling, reaching out to me across a chasm of years and pain and neglect. I thought about all the times I had wanted her to reach out to me, all the times I had begged in my heart for her to see me, to choose me, to make room for me. And now, at the end of her life, she was finally doing it. It was too late for so many things. It was too late to give me back my childhood, too late to erase the memories of basements and cars and gas station gloves, too late to undo the damage that had been done. But maybe it wasn't too late for this. Maybe it wasn't too late for me to accept what she was offering, however imperfect, however late, however inadequate. I took her hand. Her skin was dry and cool, her grip weak. I held her hand in mine, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, because forgiveness was a process, not a single moment. But something like willingness. A willingness to try, to open the door just a crack, to see if there was any light on the other side. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm here. I came. That's all I can promise right now." My mother nodded, her tears still falling. "That's enough," she said. "That's more than I deserve." We stayed like that for a long time, the four of us, holding hands in the small hospital room while the machines beeped and the sun set outside the window. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no grand declarations of love, no sudden erasure of the past. But there was something real, something honest, something that felt like the beginning of a different kind of relationship. Not the relationship I had wanted as a child, but maybe the relationship I could have as an adult. Imperfect and fragile and tentative, but real. I stayed in Ohio for a week. My mother was released from the hospital after 3 days, her condition stable enough for her to go home. I went with them, back to the house where I had grown up, the house with the guest room and the study and the basement. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls, remembering. The basement still smelled musty. The guest room still had the same floral curtains. The study still had the same pull-out couch. But I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't the same person who had been hurt in these rooms. I was someone else, someone stronger, someone who had built a life of her own. The house had no power over me anymore. It was just a building, full of old memories and old pain, but nothing that could touch me unless I let it. I slept in the guest room that week. Claire and her family had offered to stay elsewhere, to give me space, but I told them it wasn't necessary. I slept in the bed that had always been reserved for Claire, the bed with the new mattress and the fresh sheets and the closet full of toys for the grandchildren. It was strange, sleeping in that room. I kept expecting someone to come in and tell me I had to move, that I didn't belong there. But no one came. The room was mine, at least for that week, and I allowed myself to enjoy it. I spent hours with my mother, talking about things we had never discussed before. She told me about her own childhood, her own mother's favoritism, her own struggles to feel loved and valued. She didn't use these stories as excuses, but as explanations, offering me a window into the woman she had been before she became my mother. I told her about my life in Florida, about my friends and my dogs and my garden. I told her about the pain I had carried, the years of feeling invisible, the slow process of building a life that was mine. She listened. For the first time in my life, she really listened, without interrupting, without minimizing, without changing the subject. She just listened, and that was its own kind of healing. My father was quieter, more withdrawn. He had never been good with emotions, never been comfortable with vulnerability. But he tried in his own way. He fixed things around the house, small repairs that he had been putting off for years. He cooked dinner every night, simple meals that reminded me of my childhood. He sat with me on the porch, not saying much, but present. I didn't need grand gestures from him. I just needed him to be there, and he was. Claire and I had our own conversations, awkward and halting, full of pauses and false starts. We talked about our childhoods, our different experiences of the same events. She was defensive at first, quick to justify and explain, but over time, she softened. She admitted that she had known, on some level, that I was being treated unfairly. She admitted that she had enjoyed being the favorite, that she had liked the attention and the gifts and the special treatment. She admitted that she had felt guilty, but not guilty enough to do anything about it. That honesty was painful, but it was also a relief. Finally, someone in my family was willing to say the words out loud. Finally, someone was acknowledging that what had happened to me was real. "There's no excuse for how we treated you," Claire said one evening, sitting on the porch swing while the fireflies blinked in the darkness. "I've been telling myself for years that you were overreacting, that it wasn't that bad, that you were just too sensitive. But that was a lie. It was that bad. And you weren't too sensitive. You were exactly as sensitive as you needed to be to survive a family that didn't see you." I didn't know what to say to that. I had waited my whole life to hear those words, and now that they were finally being spoken, I felt empty. Not in a bad way, but in a way that suggested that the wound had already healed, that I no longer needed the validation I had once craved. It was nice to hear Claire admit the truth. It was nice to know that she understood. But I didn't need it anymore. I had already validated myself. I had already given myself permission to feel what I felt, to name what had happened to me, to heal on my own terms. Claire's words were a gift, but they were a gift I could have lived without. The week passed quickly, faster than I had expected. On my last day in Ohio, I sat with my mother in her bedroom. She was tired, weaker than she had been a few days ago, but her eyes were clear and her voice was steady. "I want you to know something," she said. "I'm proud of you. Not for coming back, although I'm grateful for that. I'm proud of you for the life you've built. For standing up to us. For refusing to let us keep hurting you. That took courage, more courage than I ever showed. You're stronger than me, Ellie. You always were." I held her hand, the same hand I had held in the hospital, but this time, I didn't feel the need to hold back. I leaned over and kissed her forehead, something I hadn't done in years. I love you, Mom, I said. Even after everything, I love you. I don't know if that's weakness or strength, but it's the truth. She smiled, a real smile, the kind I remembered from when I was very young, before the neglect had taken root. I love you too, she said. I always did. I just didn't know how to show it. I'm sorry for that. I'm so sorry. I stayed until she fell asleep, her hand in mine, her breathing slow and even. Then I stood up, walked out of the room, and found my father in the kitchen. He was washing dishes, his back to me, his shoulders hunched. I'm leaving in the morning, I said. Early flight. He turned off the water and dried his hands on a towel. I know. Your mother is going to be sad to see you go. I'll come back, I said. Not right away, but someday. I need to get back to my life, to my dogs, to my friends. But I'll come back. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. I'm proud of you too, he said, the words rushing out as if he was afraid he wouldn't get them out otherwise. I know I never said it before. I know I wasn't there for you the way I should have been. But I'm proud of you, Ellie. You turned out okay. Better than okay. You turned out great. I walked over to him and hugged him. It was an awkward hug, both of us stiff and uncertain, but it was real. He smelled like dish soap and coffee, the same smells that had filled my childhood. I held on for a moment longer than necessary, letting myself feel the solidity of him, the warmth, the humanity. Thank you, Dad, I said. That means a lot. The next morning, Claire drove me to the airport. We didn't talk much on the way, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes after a long and difficult conversation. When we got to the terminal, she pulled over and put the car in park. Thank you for coming, she said. I know it wasn't easy. It wasn't, I said. But I'm glad I did. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. I want to try, Ellie. I want to be better. I want to be a real sister to you. I know I have a lot to make up for, and I don't expect you to trust me right away. But I want to try. If you'll let me. I thought about all the years I had wanted to hear those words, all the years I had dreamed of Claire reaching out to me, not out of obligation or guilt, but out of genuine desire to connect. And now here she was, offering exactly that. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect. But it was a start. I'd like that, I said. Let's take it slow. Let's see where it goes. She smiled, a small, tentative smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but that was okay. We had time. We had the rest of our lives to figure this out, to learn how to be sisters, to build something new from the ruins of the past. I got out of the car, pulled my bag from the back seat, and walked toward the terminal. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew that Claire was watching me, that my parents were waiting at home, that the door was open now, cracked just enough to let in some light. That was enough. That was more than enough. The flight back to Florida was smooth and quick. I watched the clouds drift past the window, white and fluffy against the endless blue. I thought about my mother, my father, my sister. I thought about the house in Ohio and the house in Florida. I thought about the little girl who had slept in basements and cars, and the woman she had become, the woman who had finally said no, who had finally built a life of her own, who had finally learned that she deserved to take up space. When the plane landed, I turned my phone back on. There were messages from Sarah, asking how it went, telling me that Gus and Daisy were fine, that she had given them extra treats, that they hadn't destroyed any furniture. I smiled and typed back a quick response. Then I called a taxi, gathered my bag, and walked out into the warm Florida air. It was good to be home. Not the house in Ohio, not the house of my childhood, but the bungalow by the water, the one with the blue walls and the garden and the screened-in porch. That was home now. That was where I belonged. The taxi pulled into my driveway, and I saw Sarah sitting on the front steps, Gus and Daisy at her feet. Gus spotted me first and came running, his whole body wagging with joy. Daisy followed more slowly, her old bones creaking, but her tail wagging too. I crouched down and let them cover me with kisses, laughing as they squirmed and wiggled and made a fuss. How was it? Sarah asked, standing up and brushing off her jeans. Complicated, I said. Hard. Healing. All of the above. She nodded, not pressing for details. That was one of the things I loved about Sarah. She knew when to ask questions and when to just be present. I'm glad you're back, she said. Me too, I said. Me too. That night, after Sarah had gone home, after the dogs had been fed and walked and settled into their beds, I sat on my screened-in porch and looked up at the stars. The same stars I had looked at on the night my family ambushed me, the same stars that had witnessed my tears and my resolve. But everything was different now. I was different. I had gone back, faced the past, spoken the truth, and returned home with something I hadn't had before. Not forgiveness, exactly, and not closure, but something in between. A sense of peace, maybe? A sense that the chapter was finally over, that I could stop looking back over my shoulder, that I could finally move forward without carrying the weight of the past. I thought about what my therapist had said, about not being responsible for fixing a family that broke me. That was still true. I wasn't responsible for fixing them. I couldn't fix them. They had to do their own work, make their own changes, find their own healing. But I could choose to be part of that process, or I could choose to step away. I had chosen to step in, just a little, just enough to test the waters. And I had found that the waters were not as cold as I remembered. They were still chilly, still uncomfortable in places, but there was warmth there too, pockets of heat that reminded me that my family was not all bad, that there was love underneath the neglect, even if it had been buried too deep for too long. I didn't know what the future would hold. Maybe my mother would recover, and we would have more conversations, more moments of connection. Maybe she would get worse, and I would have to make the trip again, sooner rather than later. Maybe Claire and I would become real sisters, or maybe we would drift apart again, the old patterns resurfacing despite our best intentions. Maybe my father would learn to express his emotions, or maybe he would remain the quiet, withdrawn man he had always been. I didn't know. I couldn't control any of it. All I could control was myself, my own choices, my own boundaries, my own willingness to show up. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Gus jumped onto my lap, curling into a tight ball. Daisy was already asleep on the porch swing, her gentle snores filling the night air. I scratched Gus behind the ears and looked out at the darkness, at the stars, at the faint glow of the ocean in the distance. This was my life. This was my home. This was my peace. I had spent 37 years searching for a place where I belonged. I had looked for it in my family, in my relationships, in my career. And I had finally found it, not in a person or a place, but in myself. I belonged to me. I was my own home. And that was a home that no one could take away, a home that would always have room for me, a home that I had built with my own 2 hands and my own stubborn heart. The holidays came again, as they always do. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. This time, I didn't dread them. I didn't brace myself for the inevitable disappointment. I made my own plans, invited my own people, cooked my own food. My house was full of laughter and warmth and the smell of roasting turkey. My friends came, bringing dishes and drinks and stories. Gus and Daisy ran around getting under everyone's feet, stealing scraps, demanding attention. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely wonderful. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own celebration. I didn't feel like I was begging for scraps or fighting for a seat at the table. I was the host. I was the one making room. I was the one deciding who belonged and who didn't. And I decided that everyone belonged, everyone who was willing to show up with an open heart and a willingness to love. That was the only requirement. That was the only rule. My phone buzzed during dinner. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Claire. Thinking of you today, it read. Hope you're having a good holiday. We miss you. Mom is doing okay. She asked about you. Love you, Ellie. Love you, Ellie. 3 words I had waited my whole life to hear from my sister. 3 words that came late, too late for so many things, but not too late for everything. I typed back a response. Love you too. Happy Thanksgiving. Give Mom and Dad my love. I set the phone down and looked around the table. Sarah was laughing at something her husband had said. My neighbor was reaching for another roll. The dogs were sleeping under the table, exhausted from a day of excitement. This was my family now, chosen and messy and imperfect, but mine. And I was theirs. I picked up my glass and raised it. To family, I said. The ones we're born with and the ones we find along the way. Everyone raised their glasses. To family, they echoed. And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the warm Florida air, I knew that I had finally found what I had been searching for my whole life. Not just a place at the table, but a table of my own. Not just room in someone else's house, but a house of my own. Not just love that I had to beg for, but love that was freely given, freely received, freely shared. The little girl who had slept in basements and cars was gone. In her place was a woman who had built a home, who had found a family, who had learned to make room for herself. And that woman was not going to apologize for taking up space. That woman was not going to shrink herself to fit into someone else's expectations. That woman was not going to forget where she came from, but she was not going to let it define her either. She was going to live. Really live. Fully and completely and without apology. And that, more than anything, was the best revenge. Not anger, not bitterness, not cutting ties forever, but building a life so full, so joyful, so undeniably hers that the past could no longer touch her. That was the answer she had been searching for all along. And she had finally found it. If you enjoy stories about family drama, redemption, and standing up for yourself, please like, subscribe, and share this video.